Have you ever wondered why the United States, despite being the largest oil producer in the world, can't actually use all of its own oil? It is exactly like a farmer growing acres of wheat on his own land, but still having to beg his neighbors for a loaf of bread. In the world we live in, what you see on the surface is almost always the exact opposite of reality. For example, every single year, millions of massive shipping containers leave China and arrive in the United States, only to be thrown away into giant junkyards. Welcome to another video from Voxen TV. If you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button. It's the easiest way to keep us bringing you more. And amidst all this global chaos, how exactly does heavily sanctioned Iran manage to secretly smuggle massive Boeing 777 passenger jets? Did you know that at any given moment, there are nearly 300,000 ships out on the open ocean? Alongside oil tankers, natural gas carriers, tugboats, and cruise ships, there is a massive fleet of vessels that literally keeps the wheels of the global economy turning. Container ships. A staggering 90% of all global trade travels by sea. According to tracking estimates, between 6,000 and 8,000 container ships are moving across the oceans every single minute. Thanks to modern automatic identification systems, you can actually track them in real time. If you go to a website like Marine Traffic, the entire ocean looks like it is glowing with thousands of tiny lights. Each light represents a massive, multi-million-dollar steel beast loaded with cargo. Most of these container ships originate in China and sail toward Europe and the United States. Amazingly, the average vessel carries around 5,000 containers. That means there are roughly 40 million shipping containers floating on the ocean right now. From the clothes on your back to the phone in your hand, almost everything you own traveled inside one of these steel boxes. On the surface, the system looks perfectly normal. A ship drops off full containers and takes the empty ones back. But the reality is incredibly bizarre and deeply concerning, because the balance of global trade is completely broken. China sells so much manufactured goods to the world that it literally unleashed a flood of shipping containers. In 2023 alone, China had a trade surplus of over $823 billion. They exported roughly $3.3 trillion worth of goods and only imported $2.5 trillion. The massive problem starts when these Chinese containers reach American and European shore. While China sits on an $800 billion surplus, the entirety of Europe has a surplus of just $41 billion. But when these containers hit the United States, the system completely falls apart. The US is the ultimate consumer nation. It imports massively and exports relatively little. Because of this extreme imbalance, a tidal wave of containers crashes into American ports, but there simply isn't enough American-made stuff to fill them back up. Out of all the containers arriving at US ports, only 40% go back full. So, where do the other 60% go? You might assume they are shipped back empty, but they aren't. Millions of these empty containers are just sitting there rotting away in massive junkyards all across America. This happens because shipping an empty steel box back to China costs a shipping company around $3,000, and that empty box takes up the exact same physical space on a ship as a full container holding millions of dollars in cargo. Why would China pay $3,000 to ship back a used, beaten-up container when they can just manufacture a brand new one from scratch for $2,000? Every single year, 2.5 million brand new containers are manufactured, while older ones continue to pile up. So, what happens to all those empty steel boxes stranded in the US and Europe? Many are sold off for dirt-cheap storage, moved to construction sites, or upcycled into modern homes and offices. When there is no other use for them, they are simply melted down for scrap metal, since each container yields about 4,000 pounds of solid steel. The next time you drive past a port and see massive stacks of shipping containers, remember that it is not just a storage yard, It is a physical monument to a completely lopsided global economy. This brings us to a massive paradox that confuses even the sharpest economists. If the United States produces more oil than any other country on Earth, why can't it use its own oil? Looking at the global map, the U.S. is currently the undisputed king of oil production, beating out both Saudi Arabia and Russia. Yet, shockingly, the U.S. is also the second largest oil importer in the world. They sell the oil they drill, and then buy the oil they actually use from foreign countries. There are three massive secrets behind this. First, it all comes down to chemistry. Not all oil is created equal. The crude oil pumped out of American soil is known as light sweet crude, meaning it is thin and has very low viscosity. The massive problem is that the majority of American oil refineries were built decades ago, specifically designed to process thick, heavy crude oil imported from places like Mexico and Venezuela. If the U.S. wanted to retool these massive refineries to process their own light crude, it would cost well over $200 billion. Instead of spending that insane amount of money, American companies simply sell their highly sought-after light crude to the global market at a premium price and buy the cheap, heavy crude from foreign countries to feed their existing refineries. But chemistry isn't the only roadblock. The second reason is a massive logistics nightmare. In the U.S., the oil is located in one place, but the refineries and the people who need it are thousands of miles away. For example, Texas is sitting on an absolute ocean of oil, but there simply aren't enough pipelines to pump that oil to the East Coast or New York. California is in an even worse situation. It is basically an oil island. Because they lack interstate pipelines cutting through the mountains, California is forced to import 70% of its oil from foreign nations via ship. While chemistry and logistics are massive hurdles, the final nail in the coffin is a 100-year-old law called the Jones Act. During World War I, the U.S. faced a terrifying problem. They simply didn't have enough American cargo ships to transport their soldiers and supplies across the ocean. They had to rely on foreign ships and foreign sailors. The government realized that if America ever went to war against its own allies, it would be completely stranded without a domestic fleet. To fix this, Senator Wesley Jones introduced a bill demanding that any goods shipped by water between two U.S. ports must be carried on ships that are built in the U.S., owned by Americans, and operated by an American crew. Fast forward to today, and that law has backfired spectacularly. Building a cargo ship in the United States costs 3 times more than building one in China, and paying American sailors costs significantly more than foreign crews. Because of this, there are barely any ships left that legally qualify to move oil from Texas to New York. The few ships that do exist charge astronomical rates, adding an extra $5 to every single barrel of oil. It is literally cheaper for an East Coast refinery to buy oil shipped from the Middle East on a foreign vessel than it is to buy oil shipped from Texas. A law designed to protect America is now slowly eating away at its energy independence from the inside out. While the U.S. struggles with its own self-made restrictions, Iran has completely mastered the art of bypassing them. For decades, the U.S. has placed crippling sanctions on Iran, legally blocking them from buying or selling anything with America or its allies. How in the world does a heavily sanctioned country smuggle something as massive as a Boeing 777? Between 2024 and 2025, Iran absolutely stunned the aviation world when 5 Boeing 777s magically appeared on their runway. This was the result of a brilliant, multi-year shadow operation. Deep in the Australian outback at Alice Springs, there is a massive airplane boneyard. Parked in the blazing sun were 5 older but fully operational Boeing 777s, formerly owned by Singapore Airlines. Iran obviously couldn't just wire the money and buy them. Instead, they used a US-based front company called Iron Aviation to purchase the jet. The planes were flown to China, where they were immediately sold to a fake shell company registered in Madagascar called Yudon Aviation. These companies existed only on paper, designed entirely to blind US regulators. Once the massive jets were officially registered under the flag of Madagascar, the American Federal Aviation Administration completely lost control over them. The planes were then flown to Cambodia, a country with notoriously lax aviation oversight. Here, the jets essentially vanished from the global eye. In July 2025, the pilots filed an official flight plan stating they were flying from Cambodia to Kenya for routine maintenance. But the moment the planes entered the airspace of Afghanistan, where Taliban radar monitoring is incredibly weak, the pilots reached up and turned off their transponders. Completely invisible to civilian radar, the 5 massive jets abandoned their route to Kenya, took a sharp turn, By the time the rest of the world figured out what had happened, all 5 Boeing 777s had been painted and integrated into Mahan Air's active fleet. The US government was completely powerless to stop it, because every single company involved in the paper trail was a disposable fake. Today, Mahan Air operates a massive fleet of 50 to 60 active planes, mostly Airbus jets, but also including at least 7 American-made Boeing. These planes regularly fly international routes and land in foreign countries. And there is nothing the US can do about it, because under the International Chicago Convention, unless 2 countries are officially in an active state of war, a nation cannot legally block a civilian passenger plane from using its airspace or landing on its runways. However, because of the heavy US sanctions, many countries completely refuse to refuel Mahan Air flight. It is a massive, high-stakes standoff. If Europe or US allies actively block the Iranian airline from using their skies, Iran will simply retaliate by closing its massive airspace to Western planes. If that happens, every single commercial flight traveling from the Middle East or Asia into Europe will face massive detours, burning millions of extra dollars in fuel. It is a delicate global chessboard where one wrong move could throw the entire aviation industry into total chaos. Thanks for watching Voxen TV. If this story was worth your time, drop a like and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps us grow. See you in the next one.